What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, December 11th, 2017, start of a brand new week. Only a couple more weeks until Christmas, so get out there and get that shopping done. And we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. In fact, we have a huge amount of stuff going on in the world right now. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room ready to answer the phone. And our third hour guest today is Mark Pendergrast, who has written a book called The Most Hated Man in America. It's about the Jerry Sandusky case, and it's actually germane to this hysterical witch hunt atmosphere of sexual abuse allegations that we're seeing right now. We'll be getting into that a little bit later in the show. Meanwhile, of course, big story, obviously, was the attempted terror attack in New York in the Port Authority bus station. And apparently it wasn't a very successful one because the bomber actually survived the blast. He's in the hospital. He's seriously hurt. But supposedly he had this pipe bomb attached to his body, and it went off, but he survived. Nobody was actually killed. And they're trying to spin this. It's terror, 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 terror. And while they're admitting there is no connection between this individual and ISIS, nonetheless, it was obviously ISIS-inspired. And apparently the guy's name is Aiea. He's been in the country about 7 years, lives in Brooklyn. And he basically entered the country on what is called an F4 visa. This is a family-based visa. And already people are pointing on out, this wouldn't have happened if we had a reasonable immigration policy in place. And they're absolutely right. Now, the open borders people are trying to downplay it and say, oh, it's a culture of hate, it's this, it's that. Well, okay, it's a culture of hate. Let's keep it over there in their culture and not let it come here, because it really has reached a ridiculous level. Everybody who gets killed or injured in a terror attack from this point on, it all goes back to that open border agenda. That's who we blame for that. Now, getting on out to Southern California, the fires are just horribly out of control. Santa Barbara is now under threat. The wind shifted. The fire has now spread over 200,000 acres, 583 buildings, and apparently the new evacuation zone extends within 2 miles of the Santa Barbara Zoo. And the California wildfires are now larger than New York City and Boston put together. This is the fifth worst wildfire in California history. It's been the worst year for wildfires in all of California history. Now, getting on out to the international news here, the world is still reacting to Donald Trump's announcement that he recognizes Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and will move the embassy there. And it's starting to look like neither Trump nor Netanyahu correctly assessed what the world reaction was going to be. And so Netanyahu is out there trying to do damage control and just saying, well, the Palestinians have to face the reality over Jerusalem. There will be no peace between us unless they face that new reality. But of course, Israel's always saying that. We're going to grab this piece of land. If you kick up a fuss, there'll be no peace process. Now, Netanyahu basically came on out with this idea that he expects the European Union to follow Trump's lead and recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Not that he was asking, he expected it. And he got brought up short on that because the EU came on back and said, absolutely not. We reject the recognition of Jerusalem as the Israeli capital. So this is not going as well as they hoped it would. Meanwhile, Nikki Haley is over there at the United Nations screaming, you're not being fair, you're not being fair, we won't put up with it anymore over this United Nations Israel bashing over Jerusalem. Is this girl on drugs, or is she just totally, totally clueless? And the reality is that the United Nations is not hostile to Israel. The United Nations is responding to Israel's crimes, which is their job. I mean, Nikki Haley sounds like the kind of person who's going to try and get out of a speeding ticket by saying, you don't like me. This isn't fair. Yes, I was speeding, but you're only writing me the ticket because you hate me, which is kind of ridiculous here. All right, let's take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Yeah, black versus white, Jew versus Christian, Muslim versus Christian, Jew. It's all transgender versus non-transgender. This is all like sideshows. You know, like you're being looted, America. You know, you're being lied to, looted. Trillions of dollars missing from the Pentagon. 40,000 troops missing from the roster. I mean, come on. You know, this is all sideshow stuff. Nikki Haley, what a flake. You know, why is she wearing a cross around her neck? You know, I mean, she's lies. She reads off a script. She's a liar. They all read off scripts. They're all liars. You know, okay, this is ridiculous already, Mike. I mean, and by the way, Putin's in Egypt making deals. You know?
Yeah, and he also paid a surprise visit to Syria.
Exactly. You know, the world's moving away from the U.S. We are, you know, Mike, I'm a nationalist. I'm not a diehard, but, you know, you got to have free trade, partially globalism, which is free trade to a point. But if you want to isolate yourself, America, to the point where, you know, nobody's going to like you, then you're in for a world of hurt, because minus the oil coming from Saudi Arabia, which I talked about already, and the petrodollar, this country's finished. It is. You can't, I mean, this whole thing with letting Israel control the narrative. Everybody knows Israel stole the land. It's just people are afraid to say that, you know?
I'm not.
That's what it comes down to. You know, I'm not either. You know, I'm saying it right now. But I mean, how long can this stuff go on, Mike? I mean, it seems like day after day we keep getting in shape. You know, where's America being made great again? We're in worse shape now than ever.
We're not. In fact, you know, Trump has basically ended U.S. influence in the Middle East with this one move. They're pivoting towards Russia. They're pivoting toward China. And from Israel's point of view, they're a parasitic nation. We're not the only host they are feeding off. And if the United States just shrivels up and falls to dust, Israel will just happily waddle off and find another host to attach to. And that's just the way it's being done.
But it won't be the same, Mike. It won't be the same, though. They suck off more from the U.S. than anybody else. They will have, their economy would shrink because they just can't afford, even if they get money from other nations, they don't get the same amount from us. So if we fail, they're finished, too.
I don't think finished would be the good word. They would certainly be diminished in power. But it's an unstable situation. There's no question about it. Anyway, Dustin, we're going to let you go because we got a lot of stuff to cover before our third-hour guest. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, over in Turkey, Erdogan is saying the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital is null and void. Nobody is going along with this, even countries that supposedly were our allies, like much of Europe. And apparently there have been huge protests against the United States and against Israel in Istanbul. And basically Palestinian ambassador to Ankara, Fayed Mustafa, was out there saying peace can never prevail without independence of Palestine, and Palestine cannot be an independent state without Jerusalem as its capital. And here's where you need to keep in mind. Palestine is willing to share Jerusalem with Israel. Israel wants it all. And it's been that kind of an attitude that is behind all of the pain and suffering and death over these last half century here. Now, Erdogan's gone further, saying that the U.S. is a partner in bloodshed with the decision about Jerusalem. With its decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, the United States has become a partner in the bloodshed. The statement by U.S. President Donald Trump does not bind us, nor does it bind Jerusalem or the Muslim world. And that is a key point to keep in mind. Donald Trump saying that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel does not, in fact, change its legal status under international law. It was a totally empty, symbolic gesture. And look at the damage it has done to our nation. Think of all those years that the United States has tried to maintain cordial relations with Middle Eastern nations, and Trump just threw it all away. And the damage is done. Even if Trump came on out tomorrow and said, I've changed my mind, Tel Aviv is the capital of Israel, the damage is done. They're already turning away from the United States and turning toward China, turning toward Russia. Apparently, there's been another huge protest up in Berlin over Trump's statement on Jerusalem. And in Beirut, rioters actually succeeded in breaching the gates on the United States Embassy. They had to be repelled by tear gas and water cannon. So this is not going anyway. And apparently, thousands of Moroccans joined the rally against the U.S. stunt on Jerusalem. This was in Morocco's capital of Rabat. And the participants carried flags of Palestine and Morocco and chanted slogans decrying the decision of U.S. President Donald Trump to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, claimed by Israel and Palestine as their capital. Now, Israel, of course, is out there saying, well, Jerusalem's been our capital for 3,000 years. Not exactly, when you remember that the vast majority of Jews living in Israel are Ashkenazis, who are not the genetic descendants of the biblical Hebrews. They're descended from Central Asian Khazars who converted to Judaism in 800 AD. And that does not give them any more claim over Israel than if I were to adopt a religion of the Native Americans and say, well, we now own this place, you have to get out because we, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, we're here first. Algeria has denounced the U.S. recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Meanwhile, Hezbollah Secretary General Saeed Hassan Nasrallah is saying it's time for a third Palestinian intifada. Well, if Trump wanted to set fire to the Middle East, he did a really good job of it. And if he didn't realize this is what was going to happen, then clearly he's getting bad advice. Over in Indonesia, they're burning U.S. and Israeli flags. They've had 4 solid days of protests over this decision. Even sports fans are getting in on this. Okay? Apparently, despite fines levied on the Scottish soccer club, last year by UEFA for political statements, the Celtic Football Club fans are at it again. They were at a game at Edinburgh's Eastern Road Stadium, and they were holding up banners, Jerusalem is Palestine, blank Trump, and you can figure out what goes in there as well. But here's an article that really says it all over in unz.com. Trump risks uniting the entire Arab world against the United States. Risks it? I think he's just about accomplished it. Now, Saudi Arabia may be still trying to look at where their best advantage is going to be. But there's no question that the decades of diplomacy that the United States has invested in the Middle East just got thrown out the window. Story coming on out from Express in Great Britain. Donald Trump is told to drop the illegal Jerusalem plan as Arab countries consider sanctions. Last Friday I said this was probably where it was going to go. They're not going to militarily attack Israel. They're not going to militarily attack the United States of America. But they've got their hands on those valves on the oil pipelines. If they declare an embargo for oil coming to the United States of America and they drop the petrodollar at the same time, the party is over. Gas prices are going to go right through the roof, and the United States does not have enough in its strategic petroleum reserves to keep oil prices reasonable to the American people. At the same time, they're fighting all these wars all over the globe, which burn up petroleum products like there's no tomorrow. So they're looking at economic sanctions against the United States. The United States is going to get a taste of its own medicine. Who's going to be made to suffer for that? You. Now, needless to say, on the other side in Israel, they're already talking about the third temple. We're going to build the third temple. The Messiah is going to come. The Messiah is going to come. Actually, they've already had 3 temples. There was the first temple, then there was the second temple, and that was torn down and replaced by Herod. And when the Messiah didn't show up, they said, well, it was actually a renovation, a remodel. It wasn't really the third temple. It's insane. It's insane. Now then, let's get on back to the domestic politics. Let's look at the scorecard for Strzokgate and Robert Mueller's cover-up. We've had almost 18 months after Obama's Justice Department and the FBI launched the Russiagate investigation, and 7 months after Special Counsel Robert Mueller took the investigation over. The sum total of what they have achieved for $7 million is an indictment of Paul Manafort and Rick Gates, which concerns entirely their prior financial dealings with no connection to the Russiagate collusion allegations, an indictment for lying to the FBI of George Papadopoulos, the junior volunteer staffer of the Trump campaign, who during the 2016 presidential election had certain contacts with members of a Moscow-based Russian non-governmental organization, which he sought to pass off as more important than they really were. And again, this does not touch on the Russiagate collusion allegations. And finally, they got an indictment of Michael Flynn for lying to the FBI arising from his perfectly legitimate and entirely legal contacts with the Russian ambassador after the 2016 presidential election, which also does not touch on the Russiagate collusion allegations, and which, frankly, to many observers, looks like it was an act of entrapment by the FBI. Of actual evidence to substantiate the claims of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia during the election, Mueller has come up with zero, zip, nada. It is not there. It's a fishing expedition, and they're not finding any fish at all. Now, do you remember Fusion GPS? This was the company that was hired by the Democrats and the Hillary campaign to come up with any damaging information they could find on Trump. And now we're beginning to realize, because of the dossier, Fusion GPS wasn't doing research. They were trying to create a plausible fiction. And apparently at one point, Fusion GPS tried to create this story where Donald Trump was hanging out with Jeff Epstein. And basically, Fusion founder Glenn Simpson pushed the idea that Trump and Jeff Epstein were really close together. And, of course, as you remember, Epstein pled guilty in 2008 to soliciting sex from an underage girl. And now he lives down in the Caribbean where he can do what he wants to do. But the actual Trump-Epstein link appears purely social, contrasting that with Bill Clinton's 20-plus plane rides on Epstein's Lolita Express private jet. Now, and you have to wonder, what's wrong with these people? Is this the best that we can do for political leadership? Out in California, Democratic California Assemblyman Matt DeBabna of Woodland Hills has announced his resignation on Friday after being accused of pleasuring himself in front of a lobbyist at a party in Las Vegas. Now, he's denying the allegations, but he's resigning anyway. Apparently, they're trying to revitalize, regurgitate the allegations of Trump harassing women that they used during last year's election. And so one of Trump's accusers has gone public again saying that Trump kissed her 12 years ago and it ruined her life. Her life was over after that one kiss. Now just think, if she'd actually kissed Trump back, she'd be the first lady now. Last Friday, the U.S. corporate media suffered its most humiliating debacle in ages, led the way by CNN, and now they're just stonewalling and saying, well, you know, we're not going to talk about it. The same way that BBC talks about how they were reporting on the collapse of World Trade Center 7 more than 20 minutes before it actually happened. Well, we don't know and we're not going to say. And basically it has to do with this attempt to create the idea that WikiLeaks and the Trump organization were sharing DNC emails through back channels. More about that when we come back. And aloha America, welcome back to the show. And we're talking about this major media debacle that began last Friday with CNN, and then it was picked up by MSNBC and CBS without taking a look at what was really going on. And the gist of CNN's story was that on September 4th, which was before WikiLeaks publicly announced the DNC emails, there was an email from Michael J. Erickson to the Trump campaign indicating where they could find the files, where they could look at it. And CNN was out there saying, see, this proves this is collusion with Russia, because as we all know, WikiLeaks is an arm of Russian propaganda. They're a hostile foreign state actor. This is the proof. And everybody was just out there, and they were just, popping the champagne corks, until the Washington Post came on out, to their credit, and said, you've got a major part of the story in wrong, because the email was not dated September 4th, as CNN claimed, but September 14th, after WikiLeaks had already published access to the DNC emails online. So this Michael J. Erickson was simply some random individual who wrote on in and said, you guys got to look at this. Exactly the opposite of what CNN presented that it was. All right, we've got some callers waiting on the line. We're going to start with John in Canada. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Good show, as always. I want to backtrack a little bit and get onto the subject of Jerusalem. I'm upset that the U.S. did what they did, but I think I've found a way that I could sort of subtly protest that. And from now on, if I ever refer to Jerusalem in terms of Israel, I will call it West Jerusalem. And anything regarding the Palestinians, I will refer to Jerusalem as East Jerusalem. And that's a subtle way of protesting the fact, because just like Berlin was divided in the Cold War, there was a way of sort of differentiating between what you thought was the good Berlin and what you thought was the bad Berlin. Now, I think it's the opposite way this time. I think East Jerusalem is a way of just protesting in a subtle way against that decision.
And they've even got a wall.
They've even got a wall, and then you're sort of calling it for what it is. It's a divided city, and Israel, I think they'd love to have the entire carte blanche, of Jerusalem. And by calling it for what it is, I think it's a way of sort of putting it back in their face and saying, you know what, until you actually formally, take control of the entire Jerusalem, it's not all yours. I don't know what you think of that.
Well, I think looking at the two cases in history tells you where the bias is coming on down, because when the Soviet Union cut off access to West Berlin to try and starve them into surrendering their own government and accepting rule by the Soviet Union, the world responded with the massive airlift, the Berlin airlift, just flying airplanes of food and water and medicine and everything to keep West Berlin going. Well, now you have Israel is attempting to basically cordon off and strangle East Jerusalem, and the world does nothing.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm never going to call it just by its term of Jerusalem. From now on, I'm either going to call it East Jerusalem or West Jerusalem. And
I think it's a good idea.
That's what I mean. Right on. Okay, thanks, Mike. I'll get off the phone now.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Margie in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Yesterday, I know a Syrian, he owns a small store, and I just asked him what he thought of what Trump did as far as claiming Jerusalem as the capital for Israel, and I asked him, what do you think about that? And he said, I think that's Trump's way of asking Netanyahu for help, because there are strong rumors that they're planning on assassinating him. They're planning on doing things to Trump, and maybe that's his way of asking Netanyahu to help protect him in Washington.
Well, that may be one theory, but we do know that AIPAC and Netanyahu have been lobbying for this for decades. We know that Trump's main financial support, Sheldon Adelson, said this was what he wanted. And so Trump is taking care of his supporters and his donors, but he obviously did not really consider the long-term results of what he was doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I do kind of think that he needs some kind of protection. I don't know if the military will be protecting him that much.
Well, I know Donald Trump has the regular Secret Service protective detail, which unfortunately hasn't been all that impressive of late. I think he still has his own private security as well. And I really do hope they're doing their job, because as disappointed as I am in Donald Trump, I don't want anything to happen to him because the resulting chaos is just going to make things that much worse.
Yes. You're right.
Okay?
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much for the phone call. We have another caller waiting on the line, but we're too close to the commercial break, so we're going to take a break for some words from our advertisers, and when we come on back, take this phone call, get on back to the news, including all of the times CNN has botched the news this year alone. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the telephones now. Max in Canada. Aloha, Max. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Max in Canada, no. Max in Connecticut.
Okay. What's on your mind?
My pronunciation is a little bit, worse. Anyway, no, because we are talking about the Bible. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. So I would like to ask a question. Okay, Samaria, what was the capital of what? Somebody doesn't know the history or real history. Samaria was the capital of what?
Well, let me ask you this question. Can you show me the capital of the Sioux Nation? And yet nobody doubts the Sioux Nation actually existed.
No, I don't get it. The Sunni Nation, what do you say?
No, I said the Sioux Nation, the American Indian, the Sioux Nation. You can't point to any place as being their capital. Doesn't mean they didn't exist. That's one of the arguments we're getting from Israel now is, well, we can't point to an official location of Palestine, therefore they didn't really exist. And it's a fraudulent argument.
I'm talking on the Bible, back in the history. So we should not even back in the history, the Bible. Okay, Samaria was the capital of the kingdom of Israel. It was not Jerusalem. Jerusalem was a capital of the kingdom of the Judea.
Okay.
That is what I'm talking about. Samaria, do you know Samaria?
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe I don't pronounce right.
I thought it was pronounced Samaria, but there's a problem here, and that
Samaria,
of course, there's a problem here in that maps change over time, and the fact of the matter is that the Israelites were driven out of that part of the world, and they're trying to come on in and say, well, we should just undo all those thousands of years of history and give it back to them. And that makes about as much sense as the Native Americans saying, let's unwind the last several hundred years of history and give North America back to the indigenous tribes. We're always moving into the future. The point is that Israel is unfortunately founded on the writings of some Bronze Age goat herders, and they're still running their government as if they're Bronze Age warlords. And that is way out of touch in the nuclear age. And all Israel has to do is start being fair and balanced to give to the Palestinians that which Israel demands for itself, a right to exist in a capital city. And all this will go away. But unfortunately, Israel's government's attitude continues to be, no, we're supposed to have it all, and maybe if you're nice to us, we'll give you something down the road.
Oh, yeah. I'm with you on that. Yeah, I'm with you on that. But because today, for example, on the news, I read that Benjamin Aiea, he brought up the Bible, saying that Jerusalem was the capital of Israel. But that is not true. Jerusalem was never the capital of Israel. They're using this. They're using this. It was Samaria. How do you say
Samaria, I think is
Samaria.
The pronunciation. Okay.
Yes, Samaria. Samaria was the capital of the kingdom of the Israel. That is history. And also that is the history. It was not Jerusalem. Never was Jerusalem the capital of maybe the Israelis. Some of the point of time between David and Solomon. but there was a different history. Also, the archaeologists that they cannot figure out yet.
Well, again, the focus on Jerusalem, isn't what it's a capital of. It's obviously the religious overlap. And what's really amazing is looking at all the war and bloodshed. It's easy to forget that all of these religions began with a single source of Abraham, who was a monotheist along the same order as Amenhotep IV. Or Akhenaten, as he liked to call himself. But you've got the Christian holy sites are there, Judaism's holy sites are there, some of the Muslim holy sites are there. That's why the United Nations declared it a shared city. Everybody gets to go there and say their prayers and do whatever their religious observances are. But again, from Israel's point of view, they want it all. They want the Christians out, they want the Muslims out, they want to tear down the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and they don't care what bloodshed will result from that. Anyway, Max, thanks an awful lot. We need to move along because we've got a lot of stuff to cover before our third-hour guest.
Okay.
So, okay, thank you very much. We're going to let you go. Now, CNN, it's kind of hard to imagine how they can continue to consider themselves a professional journalistic enterprise with all the mess-ups they keep doing. And again, the one they did last Friday, that was epic. And they are getting publicly castigated for it, for once again coming on out with facts that seem tailor-made to push the idea of Trump-Russian collusion, and it turns out to be completely bogus. So, let's look back at CNN's performance this year alone. On June 6th, CNN ran a story that claimed former FBI Director James Comey would use his testimony the next day to refute President Trump's claim that Comey had assured him 3 separate times he was not under FBI investigation. That story was debunked the very same day when Comey's prepared remarks were released to the public, showing that Comey was going to confirm Trump's assertion. And this botched story had 4 bylines, including those of 3 veteran journalists, Jake Tapper, Gloria Borger, and executive editor Eric Lichtblau. These are not underlings. These are people with long careers. They had just come on over from the New York Times. Later that same month, CNN published, deleted, then retracted and apologized for an article that claimed Trump advisor Anthony Scaramucci was the subject of a Senate investigation for his ties to Russian bankers. And after an intense backlash, 3 key members of CNN's investigative team resigned, or were forced to resign, over their role in that story. Now, CNN was one of several establishment medias to spread fake news about a new study on Russian influence in the United States. And CNN cited the study from the Oxford Internet Institute to show that fake news targeted swing states during election week. But the study didn't show that, as the Daily Caller first reported. The study focused on junk news, not fake news, and then deliberately included conservative outlets like the Washington Examiner and Breitbart News in their definition of fake news. In other words, the study itself was biased. This was about the same time that Washington Post came on out saying that all of the independent media are arms of Russian propaganda, including WhatReallyHappened.com, which I can't tell you how proud that made me. CNN did another whoopsie when they came on out saying that a Republican donor had initially funded that Russia dossier. And that, of course, we know is completely incorrect. It was originally funded by the DNC and Hillary Clinton's campaign, and then later on, apparently, some additional money was thrown in from the FBI. Now, apparently, Republican donor Paul Singer had contracted with Fusion GPS for research, but it was completely unconnected to the dossier. Now, you remember last month when Trump was in Japan and they did this thing about how Trump doesn't know how to feed the fish at the temples. He just took his box of food and just dumped it in all at once. And they would just talk about desperation on the cusp of madness. They wanted to make Trump look like he was some kind of a goofball, and didn't include the part that Abe himself, after doing the feeding, just threw the rest of the food in, which is what you do. Over at the Byodo Inn Temple, when Claire and I go to feed the fish, you'll feed a little bit, then when you get down to the bottom of the bag, you just shake it on out. And they ran with this story just trying to harm him. And it goes on and on. When Trump was in Japan, CNN tried to make it look like Trump was unaware of the fact that Japanese automakers have factories here in the United States of America. These are not mistakes. These are lies. And the people doing these lies are not underlings, they're not newbies, they're not people just out of journalism school. We're talking about top editors and reporters. We're talking about prostitutes and correspondents. And they're starting to feel the pressure over there. Because apparently over at the Atlantic, senior editor David Frum came on out with a comment that you, the American people, should trust the liberal media because of the endless mistakes, and you should just accept it as part of the process of bringing truth to light. Now, that is desperation on the cusp of madness. Speaking of other false news, we've been following the Judge Roy Moore situation. Tomorrow's the special election in Alabama, and already people are on guard for massive election fraud. Now, despite all of these allegations of sexual harassment, most of which have been discredited now, Roy Moore has been leading in the polls. And then all of a sudden today, just one day before the election, Doug Jones is 10 points ahead. They're telegraphing that they're going to steal this election. Now, let's get into the war zones. There's a lot of stuff going on. In Syria, Putin has now ordered the withdrawal of the Russian forces from Syria. And basically they're clearing the desert area in eastern Syria from ISIS, and Syria's and Hezbollah forces are now up to the task. Now, the U.S.-led coalition believes that 3,000 ISIS members remains in Iraq, and they're saying they're going to stay there, even though Syria wants them to go. Now, Putin, of course, is traveling all over that part of the world, and he made a surprise visit to Syria, was very warmly received. And so, however this war ends, Syria is not going to be in the U.S. sphere of influence. In fact, after this Jerusalem move, it's going to be hard to find any Middle Eastern nation outside of Israel, and maybe Saudi Arabia, big question mark over that one, that is still willing to listen to anything the United States has to say. And here's where it gets really bizarre. The United States is claiming credit for winning the anti-ISIS fight, and it denies interfering with Russia's Syria operations. They're claiming credit for wiping out ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Remember what I said the other day? If you were to look at American movies and TV shows, you would probably believe that the United States won World War I and World War II all by itself, which is certainly not true. And here they are again, trying to take credit, saying, yes, we are victorious, because they don't want to admit they lost this one. And here is where it's getting really serious. This is an article out of Russia Insider, where apparently the Pentagon is now threatening to shoot down Russian jets over eastern Syria. That's our sky. That's our turf. Well, eastern Syria is where the remnants of the U.S.-backed terrorists, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, are still being still in operation. I don't think we want to get into an aerial furball with Russian aviation. But it looks like it's only a matter of time before this actually happens. Now, Iran has extended an olive branch to Saudi Arabia, saying that they want to go back to being friends with Saudi Arabia if Saudi Arabia will get out of Yemen and basically end their new ties with Israel. This is coming from Rouhani. And it's not entirely without merit, because Israel has been luring Saudi Arabia in with all this talk about what a threat Iran is to everybody. They're going to have nuclear weapons in a couple of weeks. And by the way, Israel's been making that claim for 30 years now. Saudi Arabia may be looking at all their neighbors who are now pivoting away from the United States and Israel toward Russia and realizing that they don't want to be isolated. They want to go on doing business with their neighbors. So it's too soon to say what Crown Prince bin Salman is going to do. But Iran apparently feels that there is an opportunity there for rapprochement. Meanwhile, Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif is basically asking Europe not to side with the U.S. against Iran's missile program. He's calling the P5+1 deal a rare triumph of diplomacy over confrontation, and he's saying that Europe, instead of siding with Washington and getting into another military crisis, ought to say the deal is working. Now, he's actually playing to sympathetic ears, because many of the other signatories to the P5+1 deal are saying, it's working. Why are we messing with it? Well, it's because the United States government, goaded by Israel, wants a war with Iran. They've been drooling over a war with Iran for years to smash up Iran so Israel can attain regional dominance. Up in Ukraine, things are getting very interesting there as well. Apparently, there's been a huge demonstration in Kiev to demand the release of Saakashvili from jail. And they're continuing to call for the impeachment of Poroshenko. Apparently, local media did a poll and found 92% of Ukrainians favor the return of the previous government of Viktor Yanukovych. They've had it with their puppet rulers. They want them out. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the war agenda. The war drums are out there. Now, Nikki Haley, when she's not out there screaming about how unfair the United Nations is to Israel, apparently is saying that the United States will take North Korea into our own hands if China doesn't do more. Well, when did China get dragged into this? If this is the U.S. aggression against North Korea, I'm sure China doesn't feel like being the U.S. errand boy. So the U.S. kicked up this mess in North Korea with all the saber rattling and the drills and all the harsh rhetoric, and they've brought it to the edge of a crisis, and now what do? They turn around and say, you China, fix this. China, I don't think, is going to do anything about it. So Haley's out there talking tough, saying, we're going to take care of North Korea ourselves. Okay, Nikki, here's your rifle. Here's your parachute. We ran out of the camo BDUs, and all we have left are these day-glow orange jumpsuits from the CIA's torture centers. So watch your head climbing into that military transport, and we'll call North Korea and tell them you are on your way to whip their rear end all by yourself. The rest of us, we've had enough of war. Over the last 16 years, and before that, we're going to sit this one out. Meanwhile, in another example of saber-rattling, Japan, United States, and South Korea are going to hold missile tracking drills off the coast of North Korea. Now, here's an interesting story. I don't know where this is going to go. But apparently, the Pentagon is about to undergo its first ever audit after decades of sloppy accounting and missing trillions. Remember back on September 10th, 2001, Don Rumsfeld got up there and said, well, we just misplaced another $3 trillion. No idea where it went. Yuck, 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 yuck. Should have been the scandal of the decade. But, of course, 24 hours later, 9/11 happened, and the plane that hit the Pentagon actually flew around the Pentagon, came in from the other side, and crashed into the offices where bookkeepers were trying to find where some of that money had gone. So we know there's going to be a break in the records. So good luck on that one. And meanwhile, undeterred by the threat of an audit, trying to find out where all that money went, apparently the military, the Pentagon, are out there saying, we need more. We need more. We lag behind the modernization process of our main opponents, Russia and China. We could actually lose if we go to war with them. Good reason not to go to war with them. And so, once again, the Pentagon is out there saying, we need all your money, we need all your children, endless war forever. So they're already out there having wasted such huge amounts of money, brought such misery around the globe, and they want more money. We don't have it. Americans don't have jobs with which to earn the money to get taxed off for the Pentagon budget. The quality of thinking coming out of Washington, D.C. these days, is it lead in the water? Are they all on antidepressants? They do all seem to behave like spoiled children, rolling around kicking and screaming, we want more money for tanks, we want more money for an aircraft carrier, we need to replace the littoral combat ships, and on and on and on. Now, do you remember back when that torture scandal broke, and it was a big, horrible thing? Americans just weren't used to the idea of the United States employing torture. And, of course, the government denied it, then they couldn't. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. So here is the deal. Big torture scandal. Oh, yes, the U.S. government employs torture on prisoners. In some cases, they tortured innocent Iraqis to death to find nuclear weapons of mass destruction, which it turned out didn't exist, for all you Kafka fans out there. So Congress held a comprehensive investigation, and they produced a 6,700-page report. Now, that was classified. There was a little tiny précis that was kind of a whitewash that was made public, but the full report was classified. And apparently there was a lawsuit involved trying to get it, and lawyers for the Justice Department assured a federal judge copies of the document were being preserved. Well, in what the CIA Inspector General's office is saying is an inadvertent foul-up, apparently officials deleted an uploaded computer file with the report and then accidentally destroyed the backup disk. But really, it was just an accident. It was just one of those simple little things that happen. You shouldn't read anything suspicious about that. These things happen. It's the government. We misplace things like that all the time. Now, over in Europe, Italy is starting to make noises that they want to drop using the euro. And apparently they're going to replace the euro with something called the fiscal credit certificate. And apparently this plan actually has the approval of the European Central Bank. And among the parties backing it is Silvio Berlusconi's Forza Italy, which is enjoying a tremendous comeback in the polls. Now, apparently in the EU's war on cash, there are some new developments. The EU's Orwellian-sounding Civil Liberties and Economic Affairs Committee has approved tough new rules on cash that travelers might bring into or take out of the European Union. It's also broadened the definition of cash to include precious stones, metals, even prepaid credit cards. Now, at the moment, their definition does not include Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies because they lack the resources to monitor them. But apparently, this new law will allow authorities to impound cash below the traditional 10,000 euro threshold on a mere suspicion of criminal activity. So Europe is now off my bucket list. Speaking of Bitcoin, apparently the Bulgarian government has woken up to a very pleasant surprise. Apparently they seized a bunch of Bitcoins a while ago in an anti-corruption operation. This was in last May. And they weren't really paying attention as Bitcoin began to really take on off. Somebody decided to take a look at it and discovered they have $3 billion with a B in Bitcoin. That's about 18% of Bulgaria's entire national debt can now be retired on these Bitcoins. Of course, if Bulgaria dumps them all at once, Bitcoin is going to crash probably. Over in France, Macron is facing a tough new challenger after populist candidate Laurent Wauquiez was elected president of France's Conservative Party in a landslide victory. This is another example of the Eurosceptics, anti-open borders politicians making tremendous gains. Now, in January of last year, when he was still a candidate, Donald Trump made a comment that thanks to mass immigration, Brussels was turning into a very terrible place. And Belgian and European politicians presented this united front in the media. How dare he say such a thing? Brussels is the capital of the European Union. It's the very quintessence of the postmodern world, the avant-garde of the coming global civilization. How dare you say it's not a very pleasant place to live in? Actually, they use stronger language here. Well, look at our own capital city, Washington, D.C. If you're in one of the federal buildings or one of the museums, it's very nice. You get outside of that, it's a very, very rough place. And today, looking at Brussels, turns out Trump's analysis was absolutely accurate. Now, over in Berlin, they're starting to show the strain over the surge in migrant population, and the migrant population is not bringing in with it new sources of wealth or tax revenues. Many of them are basically on social services. And as a result, Berlin is literally in an enforced austerity where government services are having to be cut because they simply can't pay for it anymore. And there was a story here about people having to arrive in line at 1 o'clock in the morning just to get a birth certificate. So much for German efficiency. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates just now rejoining our network here. Now, let's talk a little bit about computers. I've been getting a lot of complaints lately about ads showing up on my webpage that I cannot track down. Because I do like to slap down advertisers who are abusive of our readers, but it turns out, and you're going to love this one, this is over at forumsxfinity.com. Apparently, Comcast is now injecting JavaScript code into pages you request on the Internet. So when the browser renders the web page, the JavaScript generates a pop-up trying to sell you things. In other words, Comcast is hijacking our pages for their own advertisers. So that's pretty tacky. Now, if you have a Hewlett-Packard laptop, you're going to love this one. Apparently, for the second time this year, Hewlett-Packard is having to patch its laptops after a security researcher found a driver-level keylogger. And apparently, this was located in the Synaptics touchpad driver, which is used in almost all, across the board, HP laptops. Now, it's turned off by default, but a single change to a registry entry can turn it back on, which means it's open to malware. All right, let's take some phone calls now. Tony in Puerto Rico, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hello, Mike. I don't know if you ever heard of Jim Fetzer.
Yes, we've talked to him. We've done some of his stories, not all of them, of course.
Okay, yeah. I was listening to him the other day, and I kind of disagree with him. He stated that the Twin Towers were brought down by many nukes.
That's why I don't talk to Fetzer much longer.
Yeah, because that'll irradiate the whole city. Nobody can live there, work there if that happened. What do you think?
And there's radiation monitors all over the city anyway. If that had been the case, the alarms would have gone off. But unfortunately, I think that Fetzer or whoever's feeding him this stuff, his job is to try and make the independent media look silly. It's a propaganda term called kookification, and Fetzer, he's had books out there about how the Apollo moon landings were faked, and so we don't associate anymore.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Good night.
All right, thank you. We're going to switch over to Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Michael. I wanted to remind you also, as you went over the torture report, that while the Senate and House were compiling the information on the torture report, the Intelligence Committee in the Senate and the House were spied upon. These are the committees that were set to oversee, and the oversight committees for the CIA. The CIA spied and bugged their phones, bugged their offices.
They broke into the computers.
That's how they control that.
They hacked into all their computers.
That's right.
Yeah.
And threatened some of the staffers with prosecution. But I wanted to say, I sent you an article that I ran into this morning. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure whether or not it's true or not, but it was alarming, and it had just enough in it that I wanted to send it to you on an event that they say took place on the 19th of November, where apparently a Marine unit was sent into an armed Marine unit, surrounded and went into the CIA quarters at Langley, Virginia. Did you see that?
I've seen it. A lot of people send it to me. I cannot confirm. I cannot confirm this.
I was asking about that. But in the meantime, Mike, just since November 19th, just to keep everybody up to date, A, Trump let them get away with the torture report being lost. B, Pompeo, the used to be director of the CIA, is being removed and gone, supposedly going to the State Department, and a new director of the CIA is being put in. And also, there's that whole story about Trump trying to privatize intelligence even more to neuter the deep state CIA. All that has taken place in the last month, and there's a lot there, you know.
Well, it's hard to see how it's connected, but you need to remember what happened to the last president who wanted to shatter the CIA and scatter the pieces to the wind.
I seem to remember he had the back of his head blown off.
Something like that.
But there's a lot of and then even with the reporting that you talked about with CNN and how they were completely false stuff. That that people are saying that was leaked back to one of the intelligence committees or the intelligence agencies themselves, who of course, you know, they get that story out and the retractions are minuscule. Most of the people, including my own wife, still think that story from Friday was correct.
Yeah,
so,
and it's an old propaganda technique. You know, make the lie a headline, make the retraction a footnote underneath the obituaries. But we know that along with corporate masters and Israel lobbyists and everything, the Central Intelligence Agency has had the corporate media under control going back to the end of World War II through something called Project Mockingbird. And it was simply a case of making sure that all of the top executives at all the corporate media outlets were CIA assets.
Yeah, and that was confirmed during the church committee hearings in the 70s when William Colby, the director of the CIA, was quoted as saying something like, "Yeah, there's virtually no serious media person who isn't under our control."
Yes.
Remember that?
I remember that.
But anyways, just wanted to, by the way, William Colby was then died under very suspicious circumstances himself.
Yes.
But at any rate, Mike, I just wanted to, if you had heard anything more about that coup thing, to me that's plausible, but I sent it to you, and I didn't expect you to run it. I just wanted to make sure you saw it.
I can't confirm. I absolutely cannot confirm that it happened. Okay?
All righty, guys. Thank you.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Daniel in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Yeah, I just wanted to mention this suicide bomber attempt in New York City today. They're trying to wag this thing at us, and I'm just fed up with this stuff. It's like, this looks so fake. They've got this guy, they asked him what his motive was, and he's mentioned something about the incursion into Gaza. And that was his words. You to tell me this guy uses words like incursion?
Yeah.
And how did they even get this guy to talk? He just finished trying to blow himself up, and they've already got all this background on him.
Well, I'll tell you, whatever was going on here, it definitely fizzled, because if there are no deaths, then it's just not going to hold the American people's imagination. So this guy, more than likely, was another disaffected immigrant who was recruited and groomed and conditioned to go on out and do this jihadi thing. But somebody messed up the bomb. Because obviously for him to still be alive, it wouldn't even qualify as a detonation, more of a deflagration. Only 4 people were hurt. Nobody was killed. But they are trying to fan this up like terror, 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 terror. But I don't think they're going to get a lot of traction with it.
Yeah, I was watching the CCTV footage, and it's so grainy, and it's all, you just see like a smoke, and then just people sort of rumbling around afterwards. It kind of reminded me of the Boston bombing. Mm-hmm. Anyways, on the subject of fake news, you got to get Mark Dice on your show for like a 3rd-hour interview. He just finished this book called Fake News, and so he's probably willing to do try and pump this book out there. Thought I'd mention that since you're talking about CNN and stuff.
Well, we're talking about CNN because they seem to be about the worst offenders, but again, they're all under control, and their job is to try and control what the American people are thinking, and they're failing miserably, and I think they realize that's what's going on, and they're desperate to somehow bring back their monopoly over the political discourse of this nation. And I think that's behind the reason they abandoned net neutrality. They're trying to find other ways they can shut the independent media down, because this government has lost the ability to lie to the people with impunity, and that is that's a bad thing to lose, especially when you're in the middle of a war.
Yeah, it's this whole corporate media. I don't even use that word. It's too nice of a word to give them. I just finished watching the Patriots Day movie about the Boston bombing, and I'm looking at the credits at the beginning. Like, CBS News produced this movie.
Yes.
Now, when's the last time you've seen CBS produce a feature film that goes into theaters? And this thing was just, I needed a barf bag. There's so many lies in it.
Yes.
Because I've studied Boston bombing quite extensively. The bombs were bigger and just big Hollywood. Lies, lies, lies. I couldn't believe it.
Well, they try and use movies to cement the official legend, like on 9/11, Flight 93, Let's Roll, and they made this big movie about the heroic people on board that airplane, and there's absolutely zero evidence to support anything about it. Unfortunately, there are still too many people who will go into a movie theater, see something on the screen, and say, oh, that's reality. That's what actually happened. No, it isn't. Take it from me. I worked in film for a lot of years. What you're seeing on that movie screen, what you're seeing on the TV screen, it's make-believe. And if you try and decide what you think of the world based on make-believe, you're going to be in serious trouble.
Yeah, this movie had the Tsarnaev brothers. They're sitting at home watching jihadi Al-Qaeda movies with the monkey bars and all that, and they had no friends, which wasn't true. They had lots of American friends. They were 9/11 truthers. I mean, I couldn't believe this thing. I mean, I made my wife watch it, and that kind of made her into a little bit of a truther lately. She couldn't believe it, and she was reminding me of things.
Well, you know, the older brother, Tamerlan, he was a martial artist. He was winning awards. He had a very nice car. He actually wanted to be a movie star, and he was on his way. He had the looks, and of course, if you have a martial arts background, there's already a market for that kind of thing. This is not the kind of person who throws all of that promise away in a bombing. And again, as I keep telling everybody, the backpacks the Tsarnaev brothers were photographed wearing at the Boston Marathon were gray. The backpacks that held the bombs were black. And I find it amazing that Tsarnaev's defense attorney just walked into the court and told the jury, he's guilty. Yeah, I'm not even going to try and defend him. Because just the photos of the backpacks and the bomb, the backpacks with the bombs and the backpack on the Tsarnaev brothers, that's your reasonable doubt right there. And you cannot convict if there is a reasonable doubt.
Yeah, I had a great YouTube channel that just got nixed, and it had one video of some protesters outside the courthouse in Boston, and they were holding a big placard with that picture that you sometimes post with the different backpacks, and
okay.
that video got axed right away. That lasted about 2 weeks. That one got a couple thousand hits, but that's it. Like they don't want the truth getting out.
No, they don't. They absolutely do not. All right, well, listen, we're coming up here on a commercial break here. I'm going to have to let you go. We have another caller waiting when we come on back from these words from our sponsors. So stay tuned. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and it's time to grab your pencil and paper here because I'm going to give you an address and a phone number. If you would like to support Republic Broadcasting, and we need your help. We're up against the varsity right now in terms of the hackers that are after our server. We're dealing with equipment that's outdated. Certainly out here in Hawaii with all the salt air, this equipment all behaves like it's made out of compressed rust. And you'd be amazed at how quickly it all falls apart. So if you want to send in a check, a money order, something like that, the address is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, and the city is Round Rock, Texas, 78664. If you would like to call in a donation by credit card or debit card number, the phone number is 800-724-2719, extension 03. All right, let's take some phone calls. We're going to start with Rick in Arizona. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Net neutrality is on my mind, Mike.
Yes.
In 2008, there was a vote on net neutrality, and there's 35 congressmen in the state of Texas, and everyone voted against it, including your precious Ron Paul. Now, this morning, after this bogus terrorist attack, whatever you want to call it, a police lieutenant was on MSNBC saying that these chat rooms on the Internet are the radicalization location for terrorism, and we have to get the ISPs to shut them down. Now, political discussion is the number one threat to the establishment, and they're coming at it with both barrels. And it's all happening under your buddy Trump. All you Trumpers out there think this guy's so great. I don't know. I don't think so.
Well, no, I don't think he's great anymore. He's been a tremendous disappointment. I just think Hillary would have been worse. Whoop, did we lose a caller? All right, let's switch over to John in Arkansas. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I'm going to tell you something, Mike. Usually I'm a freaking call on the Rick Adams show, but I really don't like you because you remind me of Art Bell.
That's a bit of a reach there.
And the reason for that is, and I get to my topic here about Belgium, the reason for that is because Art Bell is not going to invite nobody to talk about 9/11 on his show, period. End of story. Now, I want to talk about Belgium.
Now,
what's going on in Belgium right now?
First of all, I've had a lot of people on my show about 9/11. I've had Richard Gage on the show, and a lot of other. Ray McGovern was on the show talking about 9/11. So that's not exactly an accurate assessment on your part.
Well, like I said, though, I want to talk about Belgium.
Okay.
See, what's going on in Belgium right now is payback well deserved. So why don't you get on the hit a few keystrokes and you'll see what I'm talking about. Back during the early parts of this country, when the European powers carved up Africa, especially the Belgian government, they went into the Belgian Congo and they subjugated that country. And check this out. The king was getting a hell of a profit off of cocoa processing. And he made an order, an imperial order, that anybody in the Belgian Congo that did not pick cocoa leaves, they would get their hands cut off. And trust me, by the end of the day, a lot of hands were cut off.
Well, I mean, the abuses of Belgium in Africa and a lot of other nations, let's be very honest, but it's well known and well documented.
Well, now zip to the future and, the independence of the Belgian Congo, blah, blah, blah. So what's going on now in our timeline, all this terrorism, all the refugees causing problems in Belgium, I don't give a fill in the blanks. They deserve this.
Now, wait a minute, John. Okay, the people who committed those atrocities in Africa are long dead. The people who are in Belgium today weren't alive back then. And so you really can't link the two or hold them accountable. That's like Israel insisting that modern-day Germans feel guilty about whatever it was that supposedly happened in World War II, even though World War II happened before most of us were born. I certainly wasn't alive during World War II, and I refuse to accept responsibility for anything that happens before I'm born or after I'm dead or outside my control. So, no, I don't go along with that at all here. In any event, we're coming up on a commercial break here, so John, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. And I'm going to hold off the next call until after we're back from our commercials. We mentioned this last week. I'm going to mention it again. Monsanto is being sued again for false advertising. And they were sued for false advertising in 1996, claiming that glyphosate was biodegradable. It isn't. They had to remove the biodegradable label from it. And now they're being sued over the claims that glyphosate will decompose spontaneously from soil and go away. That's been shown to be false. It persists in the soil for a very, very long time. And it's highly toxic, probable human carcinogen. But the attitude of these CEOs seem to be that we don't care if people are dying. We're here to make money. We're here to keep our stockholders happy, and that's basically how American business operates now. We're going to take a break for commercials, back with another phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to take a phone call now from Kevin in West Virginia. Kevin, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike, I have a couple of things on my mind. The first thing is with these sexual allegations, I don't know if everybody's looking at it the same way I am, but it looks like somebody on the Democratic side is possibly clearing out a way for them to run in 2020, getting rid of their competition.
I said that last week. I mean, if you look at the people who are being brought down, like Conyers and Franken, those who were name value Democrats who would be a threat to somebody in 2020. I think Hillary's going to run again. I think Hillary's going to run again, and she's already trying to make sure there won't be anybody who can run against her.
The other thing that it's really perplexing me, and I cannot put my finger on this, and this is Obama shadowing where Trump goes around the world. The Asia trip, and then Obama following in his footsteps. I've never really seen that before. I mean, I'm only 33 years old and haven't been around with that many presidential elections or, been alive for that many presidents. But Obama shadowing everywhere he goes, I can't put my finger on what's really up with that.
Well, you're absolutely correct. Up until Obama, the tradition, there's no law, but the tradition is an outgoing president basically takes a year off from public life to give his successor a clear field in which to establish policy. But Obama is not going along with that. And it's almost like he's running around following Donald Trump, trying to undermine everything that he says and does.
I totally agree. And I think, your Rivero Rangers, I think we ought to keep a very close eye on the Obama, like Hillary's slush fund, or what is it called?
The foundation.
Foundation. Yeah, that's it. I think there's something up with that, and tied. I know he's tied in with Soros and everything, but I think there's something really, really nefarious that Obama's up to with against Trump. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I don't agree with Trump on everything that he does at all.
Me neither.
I do think he's doing the best that he can, but he's human like us. I mean, if our hands were tied and trying to do the best we can, what would be our own outcome? I think we ought to give the man the benefit of the doubt. I know he hasn't followed through with a lot of campaign promises, but it's only been a year. It's only been a year.
Yeah, his term in office is 1/4 over. And the way he's going to be a single-term president. There's no question about that. And I don't know why he doesn't wake up and realize what's going on. We're going to see massive election fraud in Alabama tomorrow, and that should send a warning flag to Trump that unless his Commission on Election Integrity really starts doing its job, the Democrats are going to seize Congress next year by hook or by crook, mostly by crook, and then they're going to try and impeach him again.
Absolutely. Now, there's one more thing I want to bring to your attention. I ran across a plan, and this plan reconstitutes and it's a notification process to make every state its own sovereign nation, its own independent nation state. If we were to do this and to follow this plan and to follow this law, we could get, the country back from under corporate America and bring it back to the people, giving the people control of the military and restating and rebirthing page 2 of the Declaration of Independence, and then we could actually go after.
It sounds good, but the last states to actually try and do that was the Confederacy, and that didn't work out too well.
Yeah, true. We just need people to stand up, and I can't deal with this anymore. I want my country back.
I'm in agreement with you on that one. I want the country back that I thought I was living in. And maybe we've just been living a lie for these 60-odd years, but I want the country back that the schools told me I was living in, because we definitely don't have it.
Mike, I think we're going to have to fight this one. And I hate to say it. I mean, I'm not for violence, but I think sooner or later we Americans have to draw the line and grow a backbone and stand up.
I disagree with you. I don't think the people of this country are ready for a revolution, but I do see indications of a coming collapse of the federal government the way the Soviet Union collapsed. And so I continue to counsel patience and calm, and don't do anything violent that would only give the government a justification to come on in and declare a national emergency, ban the guns, shut down the Internet, and all the other things that they dream of doing when they're asleep in their beds at night.
Totally agree. Well, that's all I have for you, Mr. Mike. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope nobody else criticizes you. I hate to hear that when they do that.
Yeah, everybody's got a right to criticize. I just didn't think it was particularly valid here. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. Kevin, we're going to let you go, and we're going to switch over to Steve in Florida. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, when you mentioned that the United Nations had said that Jerusalem would be shared, I understood that, but then, so what has happened since then? Did the United Nations convene and change their mind on that whole shared, or did the United States overstep their authority or overmind the United Nations? What happened there?
Well, the United States does not have the authority to change the status of Jerusalem. Donald Trump's announcement has zero meaning in international law, and the original declaration of the partition plan that Jerusalem be an international city shared among the major religions still stands. And so basically Trump has destroyed our foreign policy in the Middle East for an empty symbolic gesture. And I would have to say it is probably one of the worst foreign policy disasters in U.S. history.
I agree. So now the nations that are comprised of the United Nations have stepped forward and said, hey, wait a minute here. You've overstepped your authority here. This is not something you can do on your own. So nobody's said that, right?
Well, what they've all come on out and said is they are not going along. See, what Netanyahu was hoping was going to happen is when they first grabbed off a chunk of Palestine, they were able to persuade President Harry S. Truman to recognize the new Jewish state of Israel. And interestingly enough, Harry Truman actually struck out the word Jewish and replaced it with Nation of Israel. And once Truman had done that, other countries started coming on board. And I think Netanyahu thought that was going to happen again, that if Trump declared Jerusalem the capital of Israel, all the other nations would hop on board. Has not happened. The Czech Republic briefly considered doing it, but apparently they've pulled back on it as well.
Okay. Hey, one last question for you. I look at the Logan Act, and I also look at sedition, and they kind of go almost hold hands, because if you're undermining the government, you've kind of have both violations, sedition and a violation of the Logan Act. So how is it that ex-President Barack Obama, Barry Sotoros, is running around the planet undermining our government? I think he is, and meeting with other world leaders when he's certainly under an oath of loyalty still to this government as he was a former president, and nobody's questioning that.
Well, they should question it, and again, you have to look at exactly what he's doing. Sedition is basically saying something the government doesn't like, and it's never really held up well under that First Amendment. But the Logan Act specifically forbids private citizens from engaging in U.S. foreign policy. So the issue is, if Obama is actually out there making some kind of deal on behalf of the United States with these foreign leaders, then he is in violation of the Logan Act, and there's some jail time involved with that. One of the things that really concerns me is how Obama keeps going on about how the U.S. absence from the Paris Climate Accord is only temporary. That's a very alarming comment. It's not up to him to say any longer.
Right, I agree. Now, to my knowledge, nobody's ever been prosecuted for the Logan Act, violation of the Logan Act, correct?
Logan certainly
I've not seen
was.
One. Yeah, that would be true. Hey, thanks, Michael. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Sherry in Texas. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Why would President Trump want to be more than a one-term president? I mean, his life's in danger, his family's in danger every day. Why would he want to be more than a one-term president? And I think there's a future for him. For the same reason that he wanted that
first term. Ego, vanity, name in the history books.
Oh, that's not more important than your family. You know, I think he wants out after the one term, get the ball rolling. Remember the ant-faced Trump that I said, what does the little ant-faced Trump do to keep from getting stepped on? You call in the attorneys. You don't know what's going on there. So I think once he gets out of the presidency, and I can't imagine him staying in another 4 years with what he has to endure because, you know, his life's on the line. I mean, I don't know why there's any other way to see it. I think
every president's life is on the line.
He can do.
You know, I mean, from Lincoln to Kennedy. I mean, if you read All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, you will see how many presidents have been assassinated or nearly assassinated by banking interests. And Trump knew that coming on in. So I don't think it's a sudden revelation for him. But I think that Trump, I mean, seriously, if Trump thinks this is more than he wants to deal with, he's free to resign at any time. And
yeah,
we're
but
not
he's not going to let it go.
Yeah, which is why he's not going to want to go after the first term. But he's going to be a one-term president the way he's going now.
Just remember, this is a very critical month this month. If he makes it from either from disappearing or from being assassinated this month, I think he will have dodged a bullet because that's all I'm going to say. I think that he's got some plans after the presidency. I don't think he's going to let it go. I think he's going to try to stick in there the whole 4 months. And after that, there's going to be all kinds of things lined up. Maybe we'll have some pleasant surprises. I'm not writing him off and saying, oh, we're going to kick him out. We can't kick him out. We can assassinate him.
Well,
that's all we can.
I'm not asking for them to kick him out. I'm asking for him to do the job he promised us he was going to do.
Yeah, but you don't know. Well, okay. I understand, Mike. I'm just trying to. I'm still holding out hope.
Well,
okay, and this is the month. Pray for him.
I'm not. For whatever reason, he's compromised or he's sold out or whatever. But I'm tired of election after election where the American people express their desire for the future course of this country, but the core policies of this nation continue along the same path, unabated. Endless wars, impoverishment of the people, the decline of our infrastructure and manufacturing, and highly toxic products being forced on us by the medical industrial complex and the supermarket. Sherry, we're going to let you go. We're going to switch over to Curtis in Alabama. Aloha, Curtis. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, this is Curtis in Nevada.
Okay.
I think the difference between Kennedy and Trump is that Kennedy didn't know what he was up against. I don't think anybody could have.
But I think Trump knew. I think Trump probably knew about 90% of what's out there before he took office, and that he's using right now the Marines as his personal bodyguard from everything that I'm looking at. And you can't openly declare war on your enemy until you feel, like you can actually you're confident that you can prevail. And so I think that I'm hoping, I'm not saying I know for sure, but on the domestic front at least, I think that what he's doing is that he's keeping low key, he's assessing his strength and his loyalty and the enemy and their weaknesses. And that when he called for that calm before the storm, when he made that pronouncement, and you started seeing reports of these indictments and the Langley thing, okay, and I think those things happen.
Again, I can't confirm that story about the Marines at Langley. I've seen the same story repeated endlessly all over the net. It's always coming from the same source. There is no confirmation.
Yeah, but we have seen signs that the left has backed off a bit, like Nancy, Pelosi backing off on the impeachment thing. We've seen that the left seem to back off, and they do seem to be really concerned. So I at this point right now, I'm not ready.
I think the reason that the left, the liberals, the Democrats are backing off a little bit is they realize that this entire year of crybaby tactics has damaged the brand. And they're already starting to plan for the midterm elections next year. So they're saying, okay, we have to put on a whole new front for the people to convince them we have matured, we've grown on up, we're not going to kick and scream if we don't get our way. So I think that's the reason why the liberal Democrats are pulling back. It's all for appearance's sake, because the way liberals are being perceived now, the polls don't indicate that they've got any support.
Well, Mike, I think their long-term strategy is like they're pushing this harassment thing. It's not going away. They're accelerating it. They're making it to the point where they want to create a big crisis where it's a gender against gender thing. And if they next year and beyond they can get in the ballot box, they can have a battle between genders. That's what it looks like to me.
Hillary tried that last year. Hillary tried that last year, and it didn't work. And you need to go back and look at the militant feminist movement of the 1990s, because you can only scream rape and assault so many times before people start tuning it out. And eventually you reach a point where there are so many of these bogus allegations that are exposed to the public that everybody pulls back and says, I don't dare take the word of any of these accusers at face value anymore. I mean, there were lawsuits that put entire Child Protective Service departments out of business. And the net result, for all their talk about wanting to protect women in the 1990s, they actually made life a lot more difficult for the real victims, because the police were less likely to believe the real victims because of all the false allegations that were around. And they actually caused a lot more harm than good. And the more they amp the hysteria in the present circumstance, the quicker we're going to get to that point where the American people are going to say, this stuff is all nonsense, especially after all that came out about Judge Roy Moore's accusers. Okay?
Yeah, that's true. Maybe they're firing off their last gasp. They think they have the influence to convince the American people, and they really don't. They've lost that, Even the people that don't respond, that don't stand up and say, we don't believe you, they do it by buying guns when there's another shooting. You know what I mean? They just don't want to hear it anymore, but they don't say it. They'll show it in the actions that they take.
I'll tell you right now, we're almost at a commercial break here. I'll tell you what the big problem with the Democratic Party is right now. That is, they don't really have any leadership right now. The only leader out there is still Hillary Clinton. And she's just trying to replay last year all over again. It didn't work then. It's not going to work now. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And as the Old Farmer's Almanac predicted, winter is arriving late this year, but it's arriving hard. And Britain is dealing with blankets of snow. Everyone's already talking about the polar vortexes coming on back. Apparently, on December 9th, dropped 7 inches of snow in parts of suburban Philadelphia. And everyone's going to say, oh, well, come on, it's winter, there's going to be snow. Yeah, there's supposed to be snow. But remember back in March 20th of 2000, when all the global warming people were saying, snowfalls are a thing of the past. We'll have to describe to future generations of children what the world looked like when there was snow. Didn't happen, did it? And they're still out there trying to push the global warming propaganda. Shocking report reveals there is a 93% chance that global warming will exceed 4 degrees centigrade by 2100 if greenhouse gas emissions continue at the current rate. So they're still trying to get their carbon tax. It's just another way to take more money away from you and make it look like you deserve to not have the money because you'll do bad things with it. Remember when they were talking about the GOP tax plan and that politician came on out and said, we're not worried about lowering taxes on working class people. They'll just waste it on booze and broads. Now, apparently, the wheels are starting to come off the global warming bandwagon because apparently grants funded by the National Science Foundation have seen a 40% drop in 2017 of applications mentioning the words climate change or global warming. And once again, the alarmists have been caught fudging the data, faking sea level rise. And apparently, the raw, unadjusted data from the gauges is showing no rise. But after it's gone through the scientists, oh, wow, look how the ocean is just rising. The reason we have scientific method, the reason we call for reproducibility, the reason we demand the raw data is because individual scientists are just as corruptible as individual lawyers, clergy, politicians, and so forth. By the way, over the last weekend, there was this major global warming conference. 25,000 people showed up, estimated burden on the atmosphere, 30,000 tons of carbon dioxide, which kind of makes their warning seem a little bit less credible to the public. But our carbon dioxide is good, and your carbon dioxide is bad. Okay. All right. Now, here's an interesting story. A gentleman in Chengdu, southwest China's Sichuan province, was misdiagnosed with HIV 7 years ago and decided rather than undergo all that medical treatment, which he couldn't afford anyway, he just waited for death for 7 years. And he went on back to the doctors and said, what's going on? And the doctor said, oh, our bad. You don't actually have HIV. So he's suing for the misdiagnosis. And that's a reality. When I had my little stay in the hospital a few years back, the reason it got to be so out of control was there were 2 misdiagnoses in a row before they finally realized what was going on. So we may have the most expensive medical care on earth, but it's not really very good. Another story coming on out from Natural News. Statins are the gateway drug for Big Pharma. If you take one, you'll need 4 or 5 more prescriptions just to deal with the side effects. Money, 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 money coming on in. Sweden has now banned mandatory vaccinations over serious health concerns. All right, we're coming up here on our station identification. When we come on back from this, we're going to be talking with Mark Pendergrast, who is going to be talking about Jerry Sandusky and the rush to judgment. And there's sort of a moral lesson. It's relevant to what's going on. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And joining us for this hour is Mark Pendergrast. He's an author. He's got a book out, The Most Hated Man in America, Jerry Sandusky and the Rush to Judgment. And it is germane to what is going on today with this witch hunt hysteria going on about sexual abuse allegations. And again, to clarify, some of these allegations are true, but some of them are not, and we need to be very, very careful that we don't destroy an innocent person's life. So, Mark, thank you for spending time with us today.
Well, thank you for having me on your show.
Well, so tell us a little bit about the book and how it came about and who Jerry Sandusky was.
Well, first, I think everybody knows who Jerry Sandusky was, who's been alive for the last few years. He was a defensive coordinator for Penn State football team. He retired in 1999, very honored, whatever. He started a program called The Second Mile to help troubled youth, both boys and girls. And he was involved with helping with that program personally. And he was then accused of using the Second Mile sort of as a candy store to molest these children. And many, many accusers have come forward, something like 33 of them. And they have paid out. He was found guilty in a trial in 2012. He's in prison for the rest of his life unless some miracle happens. And they've paid over $100 million to basically anyone who has come forward to accuse him. And I think most people are quite sure that he's guilty because an assistant coach named Mike McQuarrie allegedly saw him abusing a child in the shower in 2001. However, it turns out that probably none of this is true, and he is an innocent man in prison. And I'm grateful to you for letting me speak about it, because so far there's been pretty much of a blackball of this information in the mass media. They've got their abuse narrative, and they're not interested in hearing alternate facts. You asked me how I got onto this case, and I would urge people to look at my website. It's called just markpendergrast.com, and that's spelled Pendergrast. You'll see I've written 14 books. Most of them have been very well reviewed in places like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. This one hasn't been reviewed anywhere yet because, as I say, it's a difficult thing to get out. One of the books that I wrote is called Memory Warp, and it also just came out. And so I hope we can talk about it too. It's called Memory Warp: How the Myth of Repressed Memory Arose and Refuses to Die. So I had written a book about this 20 years ago.
I remember reading it.
Called Victims of Memory. You read Victims of Memory?
Yeah, I remember that because it was a big issue again during the 1990s when people who were all of a sudden being told, yeah, you experienced this, you don't remember it because you've got a repressed memory, but trust us, this actually happened to you.
That's right. So it became a real epidemic in the late 1980s and during most of the 1990s. Mm-hmm. And most people think that it went away because memory scientists have basically demolished this idea. My book demolished this idea. And there were many lawsuits also against therapists who led people into believing these terrible things that turned out not to be true. So I think most people think that it went away, this kind of therapy. But it has not gone away, which is why I wrote Memory Warp. It's coming back in full measure. The new generation of millennials don't remember any of this and don't know any of it. And most of the therapists who did it still believe in this misguided idea that people repress memories of traumatic abuse. The fact of the matter is, we remember very well some things, and what we remember the best are the awful things that happen to us. And if you think about this, I think you'll know that's true. The worst things that happen to you are the ones that make the most impression. And that makes sense in terms of evolution because, you know, it behooves you to remember them so you can avoid the bad stuff. It's not that you repress it. So I wrote a book about human memory and suggestibility, and that's what Memory Warp is, and warning that it's coming back. And one of the evidences that it's coming back is the Jerry Sandusky case. Now, I've got to give credit to a woman named Glenna Kirker who contacted me in 2013 out of the blue by email And if anyone wants to email me, they can do the same thing she did. Go to my website, markpendergrass.com, and when you hit contact, it emails me directly, and I answer everybody. So she emailed me, and she said, have you looked at the Jerry Sandusky case because it's full of repressed memory? And I said, really? Are you sure about this? Because, you know, everybody knows he's guilty, and that guy saw him in the shower. And she wrote back, and she said, yeah, you need to go back and read the trial transcript, and you need to look very carefully at the evidence in this case, because repressed memory therapy was involved, although it was sort of hidden. And Mike McQuarrie did not witness anything. He heard slapping sounds in the shower, and it turns out that it was a young man named Alan Myers, and they were snapping towels at each other. So I'm not going to convince anybody through this newscast, I'm sure. So I would urge you to read the book. It's about 350 pages of text, lots and lots of endnotes. So it's about a 400-page book, The Most Hated Man in America, Jerry Sandusky and the Rush to Judgment. It's extremely well documented, and I'm pleased that on Amazon it's received lots and lots of positive reviews, even if I can't get any reviews in the media. But I'll be glad to talk to you in whatever detail I can about it, and maybe by the end of the interview people will think that maybe there's more to this case than what we've been told.
Well, I remember that whole firestorm over the McMartin preschool, and it kicked off this thing about satanic ritual abuse of small children, and it just flashed up all over the nation, and there were accusations, lives were destroyed, preschools were shut down. And in the end, the FBI came on out and said, we've investigated every single one of these allegations, and we did not actually find a single incident of satanic ritual abuse of children. It just caught the public's imagination, and they went with it. And in terms of the false memory therapist, it's well known people can be open to suggestion and convinced that they've actually seen or heard something that they didn't. Hypnotists do it all the time. So it's part of that whole continuum. And you do need to be very, very careful. And it's sort of a conventional wisdom among people who work in the court system that human witnesses are very unreliable because they're constantly going over and over in their head what they thought they saw or heard, and in their effort to try and clarify it, they may actually convince themselves of things that didn't really happen. And there's not a new phenomenon here, because if you go back and you look at the stage play, later the movie, 12 Angry Men, there's that one person who obviously, without the glasses, couldn't see the crime being committed, yet was convinced that she recognized the accused as the perpetrator. That's a very real phenomenon.
Well, Mike, you are very well educated on this subject. I'm delighted. Yeah, if people read Memory Warp, there's a chapter on these daycare cases, which began with McMartin in 1983. There were over 100 of them, and most of them involve preschoolers, and you can get a 3 or 4-year-old to say pretty much anything, especially if you're absolutely sure that they were abused. And they said the most outlandish things about how they were taken up in hot air balloons and abused in satanic cults, as you said. And you're right, the FBI investigated them, and, you know, there were no satanic abuse cults where people were being forced to eat and kill and eat babies and all these horrible things they came up with. Now, there was only one chapter in Memory Warp. Most of the book is about adults going to therapy. And, you know, automatically, if you're going for counseling of any kind, you're in a vulnerable stage in your life where you're searching for answers to why you're unhappy in one form or another, whether you're depressed or have an anxiety disorder or eating disorder. You're looking for some sort of reason why you had it and how you can get over it. And if you go to the wrong type of therapist, they will tell you that they will ask you, were you sexually abused as a child? And if you say no, they'll say, well, we suspect you were and that you repressed the memory. And I've had lots of people come in with exactly the same symptoms that you have. And the only way you're going to feel better is to remember some horrible thing that happened to you. So I think most people listening to this would probably think, you know, I would never be conned into such a thing. I wouldn't fall for that. But unless you had listened to a show like this and were forewarned, I can assure you that you might very easily fall for it. Because what happens is people say, well, no, I wasn't sexually abused as a child. That's ridiculous. And the therapist says, well, you know, that's what lots of people have told me. But the fact is, you will remember it if it happened to you. And the only way you're going to get better is to remember it. And so you say, well, you know, that's ridiculous, but how would it happen? How would I remember it? And they'll say, well, you know, I could hypnotize you. And you say, oh, no, I'm afraid of hypnosis. I don't want to do that. Say, well, okay, you might dream about it. We won't push for it. We won't do anything invasive. But if you dream about it, it would prove that it happened. Or you might have a body memory. Your body remembers what the mind forgets. And so if you have some pain in your behind, maybe it means you were sodomized as a child. Or, you know, if your arm hurts, maybe somebody twisted your arm. Or maybe you'll have a flashback, a kind of a panic attack to this, and you'll see it in your mind. And often these memories come back in fragments, so you'll just see little parts of it. Well, all of this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because people will then many people will obsess over it and think, could this possibly be true? Then they will have a dream about it.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean that it's true. Or they will have a panic attack. And many, many people do have panic attacks, which doesn't mean that anything happened to you. It means that you were worried about it and you've freaked yourself out. And the terrible thing about this kind of therapy is that it doesn't make people better. In general, it usually makes them much, much worse. In fact, the therapist will tell them that you have to get worse before you get better. Well, many of them get much, much worse, attempt suicide, lose their jobs, lose their careers, freak out, because often they come to believe that it was their parents, their father or their mother who did this to them, or their grandparents, or someone who was a caretaker when they were a child. And if you can imagine what that would do to somebody, to think that the person that was supposed to love them, that they had trusted, that was hugely meaningful in their life, was in reality this evil monster, it is very difficult to live with. So, you know, I have heard from people about this type of therapy now for over 2 decades. And it is coming back, and people need to be forewarned about it. So I'm very proud of Memory Warp, and I hope that people will read it. But I'm even more proud right now of The Most Hated Man in America, Jerry Sandusky, and The Rush to Judgment, because there's a man who is sitting in prison for the rest of his life whom I'm convinced is entirely innocent. And this case has cost probably over $1 billion, that's with a B, if you count all the lawyers who've been paid and all of the as I said, $100 million paid to the alleged victims. And it's an appalling case that nobody wants to look at. So I'm very happy you're willing to take a look at it, and we can talk about it in some detail.
Well, you know, there's no question that there are serious miscarriages of justice in our history, and it's also true that government never wants to admit to it. The media won't cover it. Leonard Peltier comes to mind. James Earl Ray is another. Bruno Richard Hauptmann. Once the government has said this person is guilty, they don't want to turn around and say we were wrong, because it undermines public trust in the justice system. But in listening to
I don't know about some of the cases you just talked about in detail. So I would have to look at them. One of the things that I definitely have vowed in this is not to jump to conclusions about guilt or innocence in any of these cases. And to look at them. It seems fairly, you mentioned the hysteria over sexual harassment right now. Mm-hmm. And it clearly has reached that proportion. On the other hand, you know, it started with Harvey Weinstein, who from what I have read and from what I see, clearly did these things. And many, as you pointed out, of the people who have been pilloried probably did do these things. On the other hand, I wrote an article I live in Vermont. I wrote in a local publication called the Vermont Digger about the Garrison Keillor case, and that seems completely insane to me. From everything we know, the big thing he did was to pat somebody on the back and his hand went under their T-shirt. So that's insane. So a lot of these hysteria cases, they will take almost anything as being sexual abuse. Mm-hmm. So at any rate, I'm rambling a bit, but you sound like you know a lot about this.
As I mentioned earlier in the show, these things can be a matter of fashion, and one person's flirtation can be somebody else's sexual assault. But one of the problems we have with the liberal establishment in this country right now is they're trying to convince everybody to be offended by everything. And as I like to tell people, when I was working in Europe on film projects in the 1980s, the women who worked at those companies, they expected flirtation. And if they didn't get it, you were going to find that your work wasn't getting done. So these are driven by fashion. But in the current climate where everybody is triggered by everything, we're getting into this idea where the allegation alone should be enough to destroy a life, and that is absolutely wrong. Yes, Weinstein did what he did for the most part. I worked in the film industry for a lot of years, and I got to see a lot of that. But again, we have to be very careful because there are some innocent people like Judge Roy Moore, where it's come on out that the allegations were just ginned up out of thin air, a forged yearbook entry.
Oh, is that right? That's the first I've heard of that. I had assumed that he probably did do this. That's not true, huh?
No, it isn't. Beverly Nelson has now admitted that she wrote part of that yearbook entry that Gloria Allred was using to try and smear him in this Alabama election. So we do need to be very, very careful. One thing that occurs to me when you're talking about these regressive or repressed memory therapy, it almost reminds me a lot of the Scientologists with their e-meter, where they're convincing you that you lived all these past lives and you did all this stuff with Xenu, and it's almost like a cult. And we know that modern psychology, psychiatry isn't really a science. There's no machine that you can put on somebody's forehead that says manic, depressive, schizoid, or whatever. It's always a subjective opinion of the practitioner, most of whom have a bias to keep you in the therapy experience for as long as they possibly can to maximize their fees.
Well, Mike, you've said a bunch of things I'd like to react to. Okay. And I agree with much of it, but not necessarily all of it. I have to reveal something to you. I am a dyed-in-the-wool liberal, or at least I used to call myself that. Now I don't call myself either liberal or conservative. I call myself a skeptic and a thinker.
Okay, we're going to have to take a break here. I'm sorry to cut you off, Mark, but we're going to have to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking with Mark Pendergrast. He's author of a whole bunch of books. The one we're talking about now is The Most Hated Man in America, Jerry Sandusky. And, Mark, I'm going to give you a little bit of a heads up. Our commercial breaks are spaced rather unevenly, so don't let that catch you by surprise. And if it's okay with you, we have a caller waiting on the line who'd like to talk to you.
Okay. Before you do your caller, I want to just say, I was listening to your ads. I wrote a book called Inside the Outbreaks, which is a history of the Epidemic Intelligence Service, which is part of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And I completely object to them saying that vaccines are evil and terrible. They save many, many lives. So I just need to throw that in. And, all this paranoia over global government. I mean, you and I could have a big... let's stick to the subject of repressed memories and the Sandusky case, and I'm fine.
Okay, well then let's take a phone call here. We're talking to Chris in St. Petersburg. Chris, aloha. Do you have a question for our guest?
Yes. I'm wondering, do you feel, Mark, that there is no such thing as repressed memories, that it doesn't exist?
Yeah, pretty much, yes. Freud came up with this notion in 1895 that terrible trauma, usually sexual abuse of children, is so awful that you completely forget it. Freud forced his clients into, quote, remembering this sort of thing, and I do hope you'll pick up Memory Warp and read. There's a chapter in it called A Brief History talking about Freud, and then it was sort of resuscitated by mostly feminist therapists in the late 1980s, and you know, about 80% of the American public believes in this, so it's quite common, but there's absolutely no science behind it. I did find a few cases of people who forgot real sex abuse and then remembered it later, but they weren't, it wasn't like, you know, years of being raped. It was like usually being fondled or somebody exposed themselves to you. And I came to realize that most of these weren't traumatic at the time. They were confusing. I'm not trying to forgive these actions. They're not okay. But they weren't perceived as horrible events, and they just forgot them, and then something reminded them of them, and they remembered it. But that's very, very different from the cases of, you know, people being molested for years at a time and threatened and then suddenly remembering it, supposedly. So well, no, I don't believe in that.
Single events are not going to really stick in your consciousness. And when this whole situation about Weinstein came on up, when I was working in the film industry, there were two occasions when a couple of gay stars hit on me. And at the time, I didn't think it was a big deal. And so I'd kind of forgotten about it, but it wasn't traumatic. But then when this whole thing came on up, I said, yeah, this stuff does go on. And actually, I was a little flattered at the time. But that's another story entirely.
Anyway, it's not a matter of repressing it. It's a matter of sort of, you know, just not thinking about it for a while.
Well, I would like to add that my two nephews, over 2 weeks of them having been taken by my brother, experienced a lot of abuse, and now they don't remember it. They had cigarette burns all over their legs before a court hearing at which they appeared, and my brother was stripped of any custody. But I believe myself that meditation can solve all problems. And also my mother, in a head-on collision that made her a paraplegic, an oil truck hit her that my late mother became a paraplegic from, and others saw the head-on collision. She doesn't remember anything except for the oil truck heading towards her over the hill.
Well, let me comment on that. With your mother, which I'm very sorry to hear that happened to her. That has nothing to do with repressed memories. That has to do with organic brain damage, and that happens very frequently. That if somebody has a terrible shock to their brain, then they're not going to remember it. In terms of the children who were burned by cigarettes and don't remember it, that's very hard to believe. I would have to look at that case specifically.
Okay, well, Chris,
you know, I would like them to do the same in order to integrate them. But I understand. I agree with you that integrating false memories, I feel, can be traumatizing. But then again, them integrating correct memories would be therapeutic. And I suggest that folks test their memories in order to integrate them, in order to try to validate them with other people. And this existence is much more intricate than anyone knows, as shown by the Mandela effect. That's another topic, I feel, but it all does tie together. And I know I agree that a hypnotherapist can ask leading questions, and so the patient can try to be obliging to that hypnotherapist by answering those leading questions with fabricated false memories. And you know, instead of trying to convince someone that they've been hypnotized by showing them that
we got to take another break. I'm sorry, Chris. We got to take another break for commercials. We'll be back with another phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking with Mark Pendergrast, who's the author of The Most Hated Man in America, Jerry Sandusky. And we're going to get back to that here very, very quickly. But I wanted to make a point. One area where the so-called repressed memory therapists may be a little bit less than honest with their clients is you need to remember there's a difference between a memory that's repressed and one that is merely lost. And if you are my age, and if you are, I feel sorry for you, you've probably already had this experience where some smell, some picture, some image will all of a sudden pop back something you haven't thought about for a lot of years. And it's not traumatic and it's not evil. I had one where somebody fixed some iced tea and they did it in a specific way that reminded me of my mother fixing iced tea when I was like 2. Okay, that's not a repressed memory. It's a misplaced memory, and that's a very real phenomenon. Now, we're going to take one more phone call, then we're going to close the phone lines because I want to give the rest of the show to Mark here. So, James in Ohio, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I agree that leading the witness and hypnosis are not the best way to deal with victims of abuse. However, I want to make 2 points and get your guest's response to them. Number one, Dr. Michael Persinger, who writes papers about accessing every human brain on the planet through some kind of electromagnetic means, sits on the board of something called the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. And 2 members, Ralph Underwager and his wife, gave an interview with a Dutch pedophile publication, Paidika, in which they said that love between adults and children is God's love. And they said they were going to kick them. They said they were going to kick them off board. The False Memory Syndrome Foundation gives expert testimony in cases of pedophiles to discredit the child witnesses. But they said they were going to kick them off the board, and they never did. Number 2, Colonel Michael Aquino, who administrated over the Presidio in San Francisco, was also head of the Temple of Set, and all these kids in the daycare center started showing up with a wide array of STDs, and nobody ever got in any trouble. Nobody even got fired for it. So I wanted your response on those.
Hi. So you're going to have to read my book, read Memory Warp, and then I think you can get back to me. But in terms of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, I did write about the Underwagers about Ralph Underwager and that horrible interview they gave that you're absolutely right about in Victims of Memory. That was a long, long time ago. But I will tell you that the False Memory Syndrome Foundation is in general founded on decent science. Elizabeth Loftus, who is someone that I completely respect and who wrote nice comments about my Sandusky book and Memory Warp, and who is probably the premier memory scientist in the world, certainly on memory distortion. She's been on their board for a long time, too. And so I really urge you to rethink your vilification of the FMS Foundation. And in terms of the daycare cases, I haven't found any evidence whatsoever for satanic ritual abuse, so do take a look at that again, please. So thanks for calling in.
All right, well, we're going to let the... we do have one more call, unfortunately, who was already waiting. So, she hung up. All right, the phone lines are closed. No more phone calls. I want to give Mark time to really get into what happened with Jerry Sandusky. So, Mark, give us the story as you know it.
Okay. Basically, a kid named Aaron Fisher, and we know his name quite well because not only did he testify in the trial, but he wrote a book with his therapist, Mike Gillum, and his mother, called Silent No More. And I would urge people to read that too because it's extremely revealing. Without him and without his therapist, the case against Sandusky would never have happened. So when he was like 15 years old, he went with very vague allegations that his mother had encouraged, saying only that Sandusky had wrestled with him and had cracked his back afterwards while they both had their clothes on, which is true. But Gillum was sure that there was more to it. And he tells you in the book how he would guess what had happened. And for him, oral sex was sort of like the holy grail, and he kept going after this kid until he basically would nod his head and say, yes, that happened. He didn't actually have to say anything. This is absolutely terrible interviewing style and terrible therapy. He would just have the kid either say yes or no to something, and he made it very clear what he wanted him to hear.
Mm-hmm.
So that went on for like 3 years. That was the origin of this case. Then they discovered that in 1998, Sandusky had taken a shower with the kid. And let me just, and the kid, basically the mother had been upset about it. And so they interviewed the kid the next day, and they said, you know, did he do anything to you? No, he didn't do anything to him. But they were upset, so he said, okay, I won't shower with that kid anymore. So basically, then they got Mike McQuarrie, who had heard these slapping sounds 10 years before, and who then revised his memory and said, oh, I saw him moving his hips behind this boy in the shower, whereas in fact he had seen nothing in the shower. So they developed, basically the police went and interviewed 600 of these kids from the second mile, and they got 6 of them, 1%, to say that something had happened. Almost all of them, except one, said that nothing had happened when they were first spoken to. So it was only after they sort of went after them, they sent them to therapy, that a lot of this came out. Now, I will say that I was only able to interview one of the alleged victims in detail, and his name was Dustin Struble. And he was very open with me and said, yes, it was all from repressed memory. I said, well, what would you have told me in 2010 before you went to the police, before you went to therapy? What would you have told me about Jerry Sandusky? I said, well, I would have told you he was a mentor, that he was a good friend, that he had helped me in many, many ways. I said, would you have said he abused you? Oh, no, I didn't remember any of that then. So in his case, it's very clearly repressed memory, and he really, I liked him. You know, he was a nice young man, and he truly believes this, but it's misinformed, to say the least. So, you know, I'm not going to be able to go over this whole case. It's very complicated, and I would urge people to buy. It's $20, you know, or it's like $8 for a Kindle version of it. Go online and order the book and read it. It's amazing. You will not believe it. And the trial was a joke, held in the midst of media blitz and hysteria like you wouldn't believe. So there was no way he was going to get a fair trial. So he has decent lawyers now. His first lawyer was appalling. And I'm hoping that once it gets past Pennsylvania, that a federal judge will grant him a new trial, which he very, very obviously deserves.
Okay. Well, I certainly hope he gets it. And again, because of the fact that our justice system is far from perfect, it falls victim to ambitious prosecutors, corrupted judges. In fact, we're dealing with one of those out here involving the Kamehameha school system, where there's been this 3-year lawsuit, actually lawsuits plural, against the Kamehameha schools and St. Francis Hospital by former students who accused a psychiatrist of sexual abuse decades ago. And the story just broke today that apparently the judge, the husband, is like lawyer for Kamehameha. And so the judge had to step down and recuse herself, and as soon as she did, Kamehameha did an about-face and admitted what had happened, and they're apologizing and so forth. So the court system is far from perfect, and we need to remember that. But these cases can get caught up in the media frenzy, and there can be a rush to judgment. And
let me ask you this.
Yeah.
In Hawaii, are the judges elected?
No, they're appointed.
Yeah. Well, see, in Pennsylvania, the judges are all elected. So what judge in Pennsylvania is going to grant Sandusky a new trial? None of them. None of them. Because, you know, what good is it going to do them to actually say, hey, there are problems with this case? So it's not going to happen. It's a political position. And it's political in terms of getting appointed, too, but it's not nearly as bad as getting elected. So in this case, democracy doesn't work very well because it means that nobody wants to be, quote, soft on sex offenders, et cetera. So he has no chance of getting a new trial, in my opinion, in Pennsylvania. But once they've exhausted all that, hopefully it will go to the federal system, and I hope they'll pay attention to it. But you're right. I mean, there are many, you know, the DNA exonerations have shown very clearly that particularly in emotionally volatile cases such as rape or murder, the prosecutors will get an idea of who did it, and they will not only pursue that, they will ignore any evidence that leads to somebody else, which is awful because many rapists and murderers have gone free because they've glommed onto the wrong person. And we know this, but we don't seem to learn from it. It just keeps happening over and over again.
Well, that's partly the system protecting itself. They don't want to admit they make these mistakes. The justice system needs the American people to believe that justice is blind, that it is fair, that it protects the innocent and it punishes the guilty, but the reality is quite the contrary. A lot of innocent people have been sent to jail. Remember when Frederick Whitehurst, the former head of the FBI crime lab, blew the whistle that the FBI was rigging lab results to favor prosecutors, and they had to go back and review hundreds of cases, and a lot of people got released from prison because they didn't deserve to be there. But the system doesn't want to have that image, and that's why they don't want to go back to any of these cases where there might have been a horrific miscarriage of justice. And it's
the media
terrible.
doesn't want to do it either. The media, you know, you might have one or two movies or something on 60 Minutes showing one of these cases, and everybody says, "Oh, isn't this horrible?" But it's almost the norm. It's terrifying. If you are somebody who is accused, particularly of sexual abuse, in this country, you're going to be assumed to be guilty until proven innocent. Yeah. And that's, you know, not the way the system is supposed to work. And in most of these cases, there was no crime in the first place, so there's no DNA evidence that's going to clear anybody. They can't clear their name because there's no evidence because there was no crime. So it's appalling. Anyway, I very much hope your listeners will go and buy Memory Warp to find out exactly how memory really does work, which is pretty amazing in and of itself. What happened with this epidemic back in the 90s, why it's coming back. And I hope they'll read The Most Hated Man in America, the incredible saga of what happened to Jerry Sandusky, who, as far as I can figure out, was a decent man who had absolutely no sense of what was politically correct. He grew up in a recreation center that his father and mother ran. They didn't have their own shower. He took showers with men and kids all during the time he grew up. His father was sort of a hero of the town, and Jerry wanted to be like him and did help a lot of people. So it's a tragedy that this man is in prison, and I would urge people not only to read the book, but please post reviews on Amazon.com. The more reviews you have, the more people will pay attention to it. Same thing with Memory Warp, because the mass media isn't going to pay attention to this, and thank goodness you are, so I appreciate it.
Well, we've already posted links both to your website and to someplace where they can buy the book at whatreallyhappened.com. And I guess at this point we're going to go ahead and let you go unless you got something else you want to share with us.
No, my wife is, you can probably hear her in the background making dinner, so I better go.
Yes, it sounds delicious. Tell your wife it sounds delicious back there. We're going to let you go, and that was Mark Pendergrast, again, the most hated man in America. And the reason I wanted to get him on here is because I do remember very clearly during the militant feminist movement of the 1990s, how innocent men were being sent to prison, or at the very least having their lives ruined over bogus allegations. And I remember, I didn't realize this was the same guy. I remember reading about false memories back then, connected with McMartin and how, let's face it, little tiny kids, they want approval, whether it's from their parents or from the therapist. And if you put enough pressure on the kid to where they feel they're going to be approved of if they say certain things, they're going to say certain things. So again, in terms of the current context of politicians, some of these allegations are probably true. Some of the politicians have admitted they were true, but we have to take it on a case-by-case basis. We have an obligation to protect the innocent from these kind of pointless smear jobs, such as we saw directed against Judge Roy Moore here. All righty, moving on here. We're going to go ahead and open the phone lines if anybody wants to make a call. We're almost at the end of the show here. Story coming out of SorenDryer.com. Apparently, research is now showing that ADHD drugs decrease academic performance in children. Drugs like Ritalin and Adderall are actually causing the students taking these drugs to perform worse in school than if they weren't taking any medications at all. This is coming out of Princeton University, Cornell University, and the University of Toronto. And they all found that the administration of these drugs to children, which is supposed to help them focus in class, actually leaves students at a deficit and unable to focus and pay attention. But it makes money, and that's all that really counts. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Erica, welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today. We're going to take one more phone call. Mateus in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. How's it going? In 2013, Whole Foods promised everybody that they were going to label GMO by 2018, and they milked this positive PR and advertising and word of mouth for 4 years until this year, the year before they have to come through with their promise, and then they just canceled it. And that's just a complete outrage. It's fraud. There's all this goodwill, all these people like me supporting the only place that's committed to GMO labeling. It's a total scam. And then it reminds me of your story about the cluster bombs, where we were supposed to have cluster bombs outlawed by 2019, and then now they just changed their mind.
Well, in the case of Whole Foods, they just changed owners, didn't they?
That's right.
Okay, well, I think the new owners just came in with a different idea. But you know what's really interesting? I think there's going to be GMO-free food in U.S. markets very soon, but it's going to be coming from Russia because Putin has declared Russia GMO-free. Apparently, they've really studied it and decided this is not something they want in their country. And they've gone so far that any farmer who agrees to produce only organic fruits and vegetables is getting free land. They're giving farmland away to anybody who will grow non-GMO organic fruits and vegetables. That's a good deal.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's really good. The other half of my point, which is related to this, is that the reason that they are so bold to say they're going to ban cluster bombs and then at the last minute take it back is because of our reaction as a people. We just let them get away with it. And it's like if you act like sheep, the wolves are going to come and feed on you, and all it takes for evil to prosper is for good men to do nothing. I mean, what is wrong with us? We're like they call us human resources, like we're livestock.
Yes, that's how they treat
us like we're livestock. So in a way,
we're asking for this. They decide what we're going to eat, what we can't eat. They decide what medicines we'll be forced to take, what medicines we're not allowed to take. Yeah, the government treats us all like we're livestock.
Yeah, it's totally ridiculous. And then just regarding last time I called in, I made a comment about karma, that many people believe in karma. I didn't hear the context of what I was agreeing to until later, that someone was saying that black people deserve their slavery. So I definitely do not agree with that, and I apologize for making it sound like I was endorsing that. I just generally believe what goes around comes around. In physics, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. In philosophy, in religion, it's live by the sword, died by the sword, do unto your others as you have done unto you. It's just general common sense, but and I also had forgotten what I was talking about last time I called in.
Well,
so,
first of all, we're almost at the end of the show. We're at the end of the show, and I'm going to tell you, I disagree with the idea of karma. I don't think our future is immutably set for us to follow during our lives, that we can change the course of our life many, many times based on what we decide is important at any given moment. So I don't think there's such a thing as karma, and I don't think anybody deserves to be a slave, regardless of color. Unfortunately, we all are to that 1040 form, but I don't think...
Just make sure that your karma doesn't run over your dogma.
Yeah, I was going to say that one myself. Okay, there's the music. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Please stay tuned for the John Stedmiller program. He's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. We're going to be back here tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, please share everything you learn here with everybody that you know on social media, email, chat rooms, whatever. This is a fight, literally, for the future, not only of our country, but of the safety of the world itself. We're at war with war. I need your help to do it. We'll be back tomorrow.